We are ready for chapter 48, the paradox of the Tzimtzum. So, for those of you unfamiliar with the term Tzimtzum, Tzimtzum literally translates as contraction or diminishment, where God diminishes himself from his core essence to enable us or anything for that matter to exist. So the question is God doing us a favor by diminishing his glory where I can't see it overtly everywhere I look? Is that a favor? Would I not rather? Well, yeah, but would I not rather be able to see godliness overtly everywhere I look and not be tempted by things that I shouldn't be tempted by? I mean, given the options, that would be, to me, it sounds like a more idyllic type of life. So ultimately, the Alter Rebbe is going to address in this chapter why is God's diminishment crucial? Crucial, not just something God does. It's really crucial, without which, we'll see, the world couldn't exist. Let's go straight to the text, chapter 48. All right, bottom of 613. When an intelligent person will contemplate the greatness of the blessed infinite one, Ain Saif, Ain Kates, page 614. Ain Kates, Ain Saif, Ain Kates. And as this name suggests, there is no end to God, no finality or limit whatsoever to the light and energy emerging from him. In other words, God is the epitome of infinity. This light emerging through his non-composite will that is united with his essence and being in complete unity. So what is it? So we'll just read the next two little paragraphs. So Kabbalists preferred the metaphor of God's light over other terms such as God's flow or God's influence. It uses the word light specifically. Why? Because light stresses a direct connection and continuity with its source. Right? The moment if you have light emanating from a beam of light coming from something, and you put something in front of it, what happens? You don't see it. So light, in order to be able to shine down here, has to have a constant relationship to its source without blockage, so to speak. So the light is united with its essence and being in complete unity, just as the light which emerges from a bulb is clearly connected with its source. But just as the light bulb doesn't choose to emit its light, the term God's light could also send a mistaken impression that God was somehow forced to emit this energy. And to correct any such impression, Tanya stresses that God's light emerged intentionally through his non-composite will. In other words, God, when he created what we know today as the light of God, intentionally created it as such, as the light of God, as it's known. And we'll see what the importance is momentarily. So going back to this, the main theme, the problem of a finite world emanating from God's infinite light. So just think for a moment. Here you have God at the top here. I'm using my demonstrative abilities here. And that is, here's God, the infinite God up here. Here's me, we, all right, the world, our universe, the finite universe. How do you get from infinite to finite? They're diametrically opposed one to the next. It's not that there's not even a relationship between infinite and finite, even though the word infinite has the word finite in it. But short of that, there's no relationship because the moment you put any limitation to infinitude, it's no longer infinite. Then it's finite. So they can't be one. They can't work. Essentially, couldn't work well with each other or work at all with each other. So how does this all play out with Hashem, who's infinite, and we who are finite? If the spiritual worlds had unfolded from the blessed infinite light, without any radical diminishments, no Tzimtzum, and the creation of the spiritual and physical worlds would have only followed a sequential cause and effect process, then this world couldn't have been created at all in its current limit and finite form. If you remember, it's going back towards the beginning of the course. We spoke about different means of God's transcendence coming down to this world. One of which is something from nothing, right? Ex nihilo, as to how the universe was created. And then you have what's basically known as this process of transcendence, or the chain-like structure, if you will, where the one world feeds into the next world, to the next level, to the next level, is known as Ilav Ola, which is cause and effect. So the higher level is the cause, the level beneath that is the effect. Then that effect becomes the cause to the next level below that, which is the effect, and so on and so forth. Okay? I don't know if this is a good example, but I guess to some degree you can sort of view it as a form of spiritual evolution, where things evolve one for the next. But it's not really just evolution over, millions of years, what have you. It's a cause and effect where you had this and that happened. Okay, follow? So he says, if you start with an infinite light and then diminish it by any percentage, you'll still be left with infinity, correct? If it's infinite by nature, no matter how much you take away from it, it's still infinite. However, many relative changes you would make, you would never transform the infinite to the finite. So, page 615. Remember last week we said that, quoted from the Talmud, that a journey from the earth to the firmament takes 500 years. What exactly that means, it's not obviously physical because you can't travel to the firmaments, if you will. But the point is that it's a finite distance of 500 years, and so too between each firmament and the one above it, and so too the thickness of each firmament, 500 years, 500 years. In other words, that point is that there's a limitation. It's a creation, and by nature, it has a finite thickness or width to it.
So it's well structured.
It's because it's a creation, so therefore by the fact that it's a creation, it has to be limited, and it's finite.
So I'm just a thought that's coming up is the idea that the finite is a composite that creates the infinite. In other words,
no, it's the other way around. It's the infinite that has to create the finite.
But the finite is a composite of the infinite.
Okay, fine. It is it's a composition of whatever the infinite decided to make. Right. So by then it becomes yes, because in other words, we'll see shortly. Yeah. I mean, you'll see it inside, but basically the only way the finite can exist is if the infinite creates it. Correct. Initially.
Correct.
You can call it composite, the same idea.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it could not exist. So the finite cannot create infinite, obviously, by nature, and therefore can only create another finite thing. The question is, what created the original finite or finitude? And that has to be the infinite. That's sort of the reasoning. Page 615. So even the world that is coming, the world to come, and the upper chamber of Gan Eden or heaven, where the souls of the great tzaddikim, righteous people dwell, are limited and finite. And the disembodied souls, means those are souls that didn't come down into a body yet. The word disembodied could be disturbing if used in different terms. That's what it means, okay? The souls that they're not in bodies themselves, and it goes without saying the angels are limited and finite. So even the angels, of which there are millions and millions and millions of angels created, but still in all, there's a finite amount of angels, and each angel is finite in its own right. It can only do what it's created to do and nothing else. It's not like you can say, I don't really like my job, God. What do you think about a promotion? Maybe we try something else. It doesn't work that way with angels. The human beings, yes, not with angels. We know this because there's a limit to their comprehension of the blessed infinite light. There's the angels and whatever the souls above, which shines to them through the limiting filter of Chachma Bina V'das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, or cognition, and wisdom, etc. And consequently, there's a limit to the pleasure they get from basking in an array of the divine presence. Because they can't actually receive pleasure and enjoyment directly from the Infinite One without their sense of independent existence being voided, which would cause them to return to the source in God. So just to recap what that says, it says again, what level of godliness are they enjoying? A ray, that was the term, a ziv. It's like a ray or a beam of light, if you will, from God, not the core essence of God, because that's as much as they can handle. If they were in a sense benefiting, enjoying, basking in the core essence of the light of God, they would become part of. They would no longer have any independence whatsoever. They wouldn't be an independent soul, an independent angel. They'd just be swooped up into the big orb of Hashem, if you will, for lack of a better term. Page 616. Now, as for the details of these diminishments or tzimtzumim in Hebrew, the hows and the whats, here is not the place to elaborate. But generally speaking, the diminishments, the tzimtzumim, that's plural for tzimtzum, are a hiding and concealment of God's light and energy flow, so that an infinite light shouldn't flow into and palpably illuminate the lower worlds. Because again, a lower world cannot handle an infinite level of divine light. It would just, I don't say blow up, disappear, become totally subsumed, if you will, in the essence of God. So in order for anything to have an independent existence, be it of physical nature or spiritual nature, the angels, the souls above, there has to be this concept of tzimtzum, the diminishment of godliness, to enable what really is only a little glimmer of what God really is, to enable them to exist, and that's what sustains them, vitalizes them, and the like. God didn't diminish his light completely, because some light must flow into and become enmeshed in the lower worlds to power them to be something from nothing, otherwise they wouldn't exist. But just a tiny, minuscule amount of light and energy is necessary for this creative process, just enough light so that the lower worlds can exist in limited, finite form. If you think about it, the universe is a big universe, right? Let's just deal with planet Earth, because that's what most of us relate to more so, I assume, than the planets above. No? Correct me if I'm wrong, depending where you're living. All right. Let's assume planet Earth is one we relate to on a daily basis. And the complexities of planet Earth, there's so much going on just on our one planet at any given moment. There are like billions and billions of things happening at this split second around the globe that we may not be privy to, we may not see them, we may know intellectually they're happening. This is all happening, and all of this creation, everything that you see, you don't see, that you perceive and don't perceive, just on this planet and the entire universe are but what? A tiny glimmer of God is what it takes to sustain them. So you would think as a human being, if I had to create all this, man, I really have to put myself forward. I mean, I really have to be heavily
I
invested.
got to come up with gravity. I got to come up with
Yeah, a
air,
lot of
I gotta
things.
come up
Even
with
before Newton and these
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. And you just think about it, it's mind-boggling. You make your head spin. And you would think this would be a full-time job and change. I need a staff of 1 million just to keep track of some things. And yet all of this is but a little glimmer of God that keeps it going. So that gives you an idea of what the infinitude, however we understand it, is relative to the finitude of finite world or universe that we're living in. So this radically diminished light is a very small glimmer of light. And it's literally considered zero, quote, in comparison to its source, the unlimited, infinite light, page 617, and there's no relative value or comparison between them at all. Why? Mathematically, the term relative value has a straightforward meaning. In other words, where, for example, the number 1 has a relative value to the number 1 million, right? It's 1 of 1 million. It may not be a lot, but it's something. Somebody here?
That's
They're going to
Oh, okay. But compared to something that is infinite and beyond number, it has no relative value at all. In other words, the 1 to 1 million or 1 billion or 1 trillion is still something. The 1 to infinity is nothing. Correct?
Mhm.
And it isn't even 1 millionth or 100 millionth of infinity. Rather, it's considered literally zero. So in a sense, so really the world that's created and the glimmer of light that God uses to create this world is really like nothing compared to God himself. That's the point. Why? Because God is infinite and the world is finite. So since we're finite, even if we're 1 in the place of trillion, still, if it's 1 trillion, it's still a finite number. But Hashem is infinite, so therefore everything that exists in this universe in reality is like nothing to him. With me on that one? More Balvini?
Because we're
It's not, you're right. So yes, it's a contradiction of terms to a degree. On one hand, I am super important to God, to the extent that I meant to say that the world was created for me, says the Talmud. On the other hand, the whole world is like absolute nothingness. So you're right. You're right, and you're also right. We'll get to the two rights. Let me finish the chapter first, okay? Midway down, 617. The Kachamamashi Bechinas Ha'ara Ha'ara Muetas Zum Special Yom Tachtein Lashpi Avam Lachis. And it's exactly the same with the minuscule glimmer of God's light and mesh in the upper and lower worlds through which the life energy flows to them. The Gabi Erech Hagonas Benel Mishum Bechinas Einsek, which is considered zero in comparison to God's hidden and concealed light, which is infinite. So the term hidden and concealed, used here in reference to the infinite light, could be confusing. This might help understand it. After all, you can't actually see any of God's spiritual light, neither the infinite light nor the minuscule and finite light, which reaches the world. You don't see God's light everywhere overtly. So why does the Tanya use the term hidden and concealed? Only in reference to the infinite light. The issue here is not about whether the light is visible, but rather if it is receivable and compatible with your existence. Because in order for your existence to continue every second, you must receive God's energizing light. If God pulled the plug for just a second, the whole universe would go back to absolute nothingness. We'd vaporize. So God's so hidden and concealed here means that the light is unavailable to you. That's what concealed means. Unavailable to you and incompatible with your existence. Page 618. So the infinite light, which is hidden and concealed, doesn't become enmeshed in the worlds palpably to provide them with energy. So if that's the case, I'm going to ask the following question. All right. So let's assume God has this hidden light that I'm not privy to. The world's not privy to. But it's there. It's hidden. It just means we can't see it. Correct? So where is it then? Where is the hidden place that God's hiding himself? We're saying God's there. God's everywhere. God's all pervasive. But if it's in the soul of everything, then it's in that thing which is created as a finite being. It can't be.
But it's hidden. The soul is hidden.
It's true. So any level of godliness, we don't overtly see. You can't see the soul in somebody physically. Again, no, you see the table. You can't see the soul in the table. You can see the human being. You don't see the soul in the human being. So that's true. Granted, no, you're right. The table has a level of the soul in it. A tree does. Okay, make it simple. But you don't see the soul in a tree, as you don't necessarily physically see the soul in a human being. We believe there's a soul because, as a Jew, what separates a living person from a non-living person? The soul is still vested in the body. Once the soul leaves, then the body dies. Basically, is what it is. Yes.
Is the soul the personality?
The personality is part of the soul.
Right. Okay.
The soul, in the sense, remember, you have two souls as a Jew: the animal soul, godly soul.
Right.
That, in a sense,
that's
helps.
divine.
Right, and part of within that soul are your intellective properties, faculties, and as well as your emotive qualities and properties and the like, which ultimately help to make who your personality or what your personality is. That's all part of your soul makeup. So whether the person is by nature a kind person or a less kind person or an angry person, a severe person or not, these are all part of what our soul makeup is.
Right.
And struggles thereof that every person, every individual has, either figuring out how to channel their energies properly. Did I put that nicely?
Yeah.
Okay, that was political.
So,
I got that.
so would we say over the course of history that the closest that we ever got to it not being hidden was at Sinai?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Because we heard,
And-
quote unquote, God's voice, booming voice, that we
We
said,
said we can't take it.
that's it, done. Exactly.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah.
That's true. But again, we still don't see God per se.
Right.
Although it says, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but it says when the Jews were at Mount Sinai, they saw what they heard. Roinas Hanishma. Normally, when you hear something, you can't see, you hear it. They're able to see that which is heard. What exactly that means is a little hard to describe. Yeah, but we can come up with cliches, but what is an action? There's no experience today that we can have that would mimic what they had.
Right.
That's the bottom line. All right. So going back to this whole hidden God thing. Where is that God? Where is God ultimately in this hidden state? Rather, the infinite light, often described as encompassing the world. We've used this term repeatedly throughout Tanya. Two levels of godliness, one that manifests itself in the worlds and one encompasses the worlds. You remember that? Consider, no?
No, I don't remember.
I guess it must too much,
Today is my-
too much to drink. Don't feel bad. Even the ones who were here don't remember it. So you don't have to worry about it. I obviously did a great job teaching the class.
That's right.
So it's called by the Zohar the light which transcends, literally means encompasses, circles all the world. That's the hidden light. So what exactly is that? This isn't a spatial reference to something physically circling and encompassing from above, God forbid, because that would imply that God isn't present in the world. He's hovering above. You maybe, there's those who like to believe that God created the world. Fine, I believe in that. But then God's on vacation and Mother Nature took over and God is doing whatever God does, which is not what the Torah says. Well, so there's both elements. We're going to get them to God. There's two elements to God. There's a part of God, quote unquote, that's manifest and vitalizes everything in the world. That's manifest in us, our souls, and what have you. And then there's this level of God, the hidden part of God, which is not palpably felt, which is not compatible, consistent with creation. There remains sort of encompassing, surrounding everything. Rather, the spatial terminology is a metaphor to imply that in terms of palpable flow, it's as if the light was circling and encompassing from above without extending below. So he explains, infinite light, of course, is everywhere. If it's infinite, then it's everywhere. There's no limitation. But if we're to speak in terms of where that light and or energy can be received as an accessible flow or light, so then we have to say that it's beyond us. That's not accessible to me because I'm a finite being. That's an infinite level of godliness. That's not diminished in a sense, like the level that is that's manifest in the world. Because a flow which is palpable in the worlds is called enmeshed or manifest. Why? Since it meshes with the worlds which integrate and grasp the flow that they receive. Which isn't true with a flow that's not palpable to the recipients, that's that encompassing level of godliness, but remains hidden and concealed, unable to be grasped by the world. Such a flow is not called enmeshed, but encompassing or encircling. Hilkach, therefore, page 619. Since the worlds are limited and finite, any world, spiritual worlds, physical worlds, they're all limited and finite in their own way, it follows that the blessed infinite light cannot be enmeshed or palpably revealed in them. Just except for a tiny, minuscule sliver of light, which is very, very slight and diminished, which is merely there to energize them in a finite, limited way. But the primary component of this light, devoid of any significant diminishment, is called encompassing or encircling. Because it doesn't flow palpably into the worlds which are limited and finite. So the next part helps to elucidate a little bit. Here it says the presence of the blessed infinite light is something of a paradox, okay? Because he is and he's not. He's revealed and he's not revealed. The light is present and accessible only in a radically diminished form. But the real undiminished light is not present or non-present and merely encircles us in the sense that it's inaccessible to us, and that's despite the fact that it's really right here. So it's not like that level of godliness is not here. It's everywhere. It's all pervasive. Remember, if God is infinite, so there's no limitation to infinitude. The difference is that we as finite beings cannot appreciate that. We're incompatible because we're finite, that's infinite. So the only thing that really sustains us or any of the worlds is that little glimmer, minuscule glimmer of godliness that comes and thus sustains the physical world, spiritual world, and everything else that exists. Because he's diminished himself, I know not all of you were here at the beginning of the class, so just to explain.
Fine, pick on me.
Some of us were not here anyway. So Tzimtzum basically is God. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's basically God concealing himself from himself. which is a physical possibility as a human being. So, for example, let's assume, for argument's sake, this is godliness. This is abject, full-blown, revealed godliness. In order for me down here, this is us, we, whatever it is, at the bottom, to exist, God has to conceal himself up here from within himself, because he's infinite, to allow any process of finitude to begin to exist. So it's concealing himself from himself, which you cannot do as a human being. We can't do as human beings. You can play hide and seek, but you're still there.
Is that cause and effect?
It's what creates cause and effect later. The first part is not cause and effect. No.
Okay.
It's a little beyond this class. Kind of discussed it early in Tanya. There's certain spiritual worlds, the world of Keter. In short, where there's the force. Have you ever studied any Hasidut at all? Or?
I got chapter 1 of Tanya.
Okay, so there's four spiritual basic.
I've studied a lot of different things, but yeah.
There's four basic spiritual worlds in ascending order. Spiritual worlds: Asiya, the world of creation, the world of action, the world we live in, the world of Yetzira, formation, the world of Bria, creation, the world of Atzilus, emanation, which is an extremely high spiritual world. Above that, there's a world of called Keter, which means crown, literally, which is subdivided into. This is not really the way it looks, but I'm just for illustrative purposes. Let's assume it's an orb, a circle, and there's a line going through the middle of it. So from the line upwards is basically infinite godliness. From the line downwards is where finitude begins to start. There has to be like a gap in some point. It's called the makam hachalal. It's like the empty space where God goes from being infinite to becoming finite, to allowing finitude to exist. So that space is God concealing himself from within himself. That's, I don't know if that made any sense to you.
That's Keter.
That's in the world of Keter, or even pre-Keter. There's different levels of this diminishment happening, but on 1 foot, which really didn't do any justice to what I just said, but to give you some idea, okay, for future reference. All right, moving right along. So we're at the bottom of page 619. An illustration of this paradoxical concept is can be gleaned from this physical world. Page 620. What is this? What are we talking about? So the physical world we live in is made up of, there's 4 different levels to creation. Remember, what are the 4 levels of creation? Bottom, lowest level of creation is not spiritual worlds. The mineral, inanimate objects, minerals, and then above that is the plant world, and then animal world, and human beings. So the physical earth we're talking about now is talking about those elements. Page 620. So while on one hand, all the earth is filled with his glory, right? Isaiah says, it's part of davening, we say, his glory referring to God himself, the blessed infinite light, as it says in Jeremiah. Do I personally not fill heaven and earth, says God? It's a rhetorical question. Nevertheless, while the blessed infinite light may fill the world, its flow doesn't get palpably enmeshed with the physical earth, except for the tiny, minuscule amount of energy evident in motionless matter, like the inanimate. And plants, and all the blessed infinite light in the world is totally inaccessible, so it's described as encircling the world. Even though it's actually in the world, because it's in everything. It's not palpably felt. We call it, the term that we use is encircling the world. Because its influence is not felt there more palpably, only as a heavily veiled and concealed influence. So why should the inaccessible quality of the light be referred to as encompassing from above? What does this spatial analogy add? In other words, use this term, it's sort of hovering from above. So to me, something hovering from above is like, I don't know, the heavens are hovering above. Clouds may be hovering above us, right? It has a spatial relationship, very spatial. Okay, in Jewish we say very spatial. Okay, but how does this help me over here? Where God is, we say God is in some spatial way. God is encompassing. It's a term that I relate to, something that's hovering above me. When in reality, He's everywhere. Any veiled influence is referred to as encompassing from above. That's the terminology that's used to describe something which is veiled, highly diminished, and not manifest directly in anything. Because the unmanifest world is above the level of the manifest world, as it says in the Zohar. So the encircling light is intrinsically aloof from and incompatible with the world. It's from an energy which defies any worldly manifestation. This is the meaning of the term above in this context. We talk about encompassing from above. So now we have a physical illustration of encircling. To make it more easily understood, page 621, is comparable to a person's mind encompassing an object when he pictures something that he saw or is seeing. Let's assume he saw this bottle of water. Okay, so now my mind is encompassing what I see, correct? I'm taking it in, so to speak. Now, even though the entire actual object, its outside, inside, and core, is pictured completely in his mind and thoughts, because he saw or is seeing all of it, nevertheless, a person's knowledge has no influence on the actual object in any way. In other words, the fact that I know that this is a bottle of water, and I know it's, what is it, however amounts is 8 ounces, because it says 8 ounces on it, and I understand that, and I understand what the water is. I got it all. I took it all in. But does my understanding of what this is in any way, shape, or form change this bottle of water?
No, and you're not
Nothing.
the water.
And I'm not the water, exactly. So I can understand. I took it in. I'm encompassing. My brain is encompassing the whole concept, but I'm not the concept. Okay. Even though you could say that his mind encompasses every detail of that object, you could also say the object itself is absorbed in and engulfed by his mindful thoughts, but still but nevertheless, obviously the object isn't really engulfed in his mind in a physical sense. It's only engulfed in the person's imaginative thoughts in his mind. So I can, for example, look at this bottle of water, I walk away, I come back, and a day later, I'm thinking about that 8-ounce Crystal Geisel bottle that I saw sitting on the table. And I can envision exactly what it looked like and what it was, etc. But still in all, even though I've taken it all in, it's like a part of my memory now. But I am, as you put it, I'm not that bottle. And I never will be that bottle. So I'm sort of like hovering, I'm encompassing it, but still at the same time, I'm not in it because I'm not it. We're two separate entities.
Is our drive for ascension to be able to transcend that?
To be able to
And
transcend what?
And if I'm taking you down a path, no,
It won't be the first one.
but well, I don't
What do you mean by?
I don't want to lose your flow.
No, it's fine. Well, we're good. We'll finish it.
Okay. Just the idea that our like trying to ascend to something that we can't observe at this point.
So the answer is that if it's something that you can't observe, then ostensibly, it can't meaning that it's not humanly possible. I don't mean can't like as a self-limitation. Can't where it's not humanly possible. So, for example, there's certain elements of godliness that I can't perceive. It's not possible. I'm a finite being. God's infinite, and finite doesn't understand infinite. So no matter what I do, I'm not going to understand infinite. I may have better understanding based on my limited understandings. I might have some better understanding as to what it is, but am I truly going to understand God in his full infinitude? Absolutely not. Not possible.
How close can you get?
You can get closer than where I am by all means. Okay, or where most people are.
That's what, in other words.
The answer is yes. The objective is to get out of your shell, if
Right.
you will, and ascend the ladder as high as you can physically go.
Right.
So some people have the potential to go higher than others, the way God created us to be. And our objective is to be able to fulfill that potential. So the question is whether we do or we don't. Some people don't use their potential, or they stop at some point and say, it's too hard, too tired.
But as a nation, are we trying to show humanity that you do spend?
So 100%, there's a microcosmic relationship between man and God and the macrocosmic.
Yeah.
Microcosmically, yes, we have a mandate, every one of us, to ascend that ladder. And macrocosmically, as a nation, we have to ascend that ladder. Yes, right. The answer is yes and yes.
Okay.
All right, bottom of page 6. No, it's fine. Page 621. Of whom, but the blessed Holy One, of whom it is written, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts." Isaiah, page 622. So his mindful thoughts, God's mindful thoughts, through which he knows all the creations, because he created us, do engulf each individual creation from top to bottom, its inside and its core. God's thoughts engulf them all in actual reality. Since God and his knowledge is everywhere, when he knows an object, he encompasses it literally. Unlike myself, who is not the bottle of water, I didn't create this bottle of water or the water in it. So I can only understand it to whatever level it may be. But God, who did create the water and the bottle and everything else,
And you,
so then that is essence, basically God's essence is in all of this, and it's part of God ultimately. While as to me, as a human being, we're two distinct separate items, and as much as I appreciate the water and the bottle, what have you, I'm still not going to be the bottle. The Lamashal, for example, page 622. The Earth's globe, God's knowledge encompasses the entire diameter of the Earth's globe. So the whole, just envision the Earth's globe, and God's knowledge is all around the entire Earth. So all and everything inside of it, to its core and its extremity, in other words, from the core of the Earth, however far down that is, to the external part that we see, all in actual reality, because this knowledge is in fact the sustaining energy of the whole earth in its entirety. God's knowledge, God knowing the entire universe, is what enables the earth to be sustained, and it's the power which continually brings the earth into being, something from nothing. So in other words, if God didn't take in God's knowledge, quote unquote, didn't take in the entire universe and thus constantly sustain it, every element of this universe, and the universe would stop existing, period. Unlike myself, with the bottle of water, that if I stop thinking about it, it's still going to be there, whether I even think about it or believe it or don't believe it, it's still there. As opposed to Hashem, and what Hashem created, in order for it to exist, takes God's constant, quote unquote, knowledge, if you will, encompassing and surrounding that object. In this case, it's the universe. Only the earth couldn't have been created in its present limited and finite form, with only a very minuscule energy that allows for mineral or vegetable forms. If it were not for numerous profound diminishments, which diminish the light and energy that is enmeshed in the earth's globe so as to power and sustain it, to be extremely limited, enough to power mere motionless objects and plants. In other words, when you look at a human being, is it easier to say, well, God must exist? Look at this beautiful person who's animated, so successful. There's got to be something that's powering them, right? That's, just making it work. Or even with animals, you see the animal kingdom. It's a fascinating kingdom, right? That someone must have created and sustained and keeps it going, and all the beauty and attributes of each animal individually. When it comes to looking at rocks, unless you're a geologist, they're not as exciting, right? A rock's a rock, okay, granted, there's different kind of rocks, metamorphous rocks, and this rock, whatever it is, fine. But all of a sudden, they don't move. They're not cute. Most people, I should say, don't have rocks as pets. I shouldn't say nobody, because nowadays, maybe some people do have rocks as pets. Well, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, they don't usually walk them down. Maybe they do. I don't know. Listen, when you're on enough of something, you can walk rocks down the street. It's not a problem. So I take that statement back. I shouldn't say nobody keeps rocks as pets. Okay. Okay, so we're up to page 623. Nevertheless, this illustration is inaccurate in the sense that God's knowledge at its core is not a diminished light, but one with his essence and being. In other words, nothing has changed with God when he created the world. Any element of creation, no matter how high or low it may be, the fact that God is manifest in it didn't change God an iota. Nothing. The light of God's knowledge as it is found in the world is in an extremely diminished form, In its pre-diminished state, that light is totally one with God and expresses its true infinitude. But we're not privy to that. The Tanya now cites proof that God's knowledge is one with his essence and being and does not share the same qualities as human knowledge. So God's knowledge and our knowledge are not one and the same. What's the example? And this is brought again back down chapter 2. We mentioned the same thing earlier. The Rambam writes, the God is simultaneously the power to know, the knower, and the known. And through knowing himself, so to speak, he knows all the creations, not by knowing something outside of him, as is the case with human knowledge. When I know something else, I've taken an external knowledge and sort of put that into my mind, but it's not me. I'm not the knowledge, or I'm not the subject matter. Because all existence is actually derived from his true existence rather. And just in case you had trouble understanding this, he writes, though this concept defies coherent mortal comprehension. So if you have trouble digesting that, you're in very good company. Okay, let's just, before we finish, we'll go to the Haggadah, the note at the bottom, on the bottom line, which he writes, the following echoes the Tanya's comments above in the author's note to chapter 2. As the Rambam, Maimonides, of blessed memory, wrote, and the sages of the Kabbalah agreed with the Rambam on this point, as Rabbi Moshe Cordovero wrote in the Pardes, bottom of 624. And he says the Tanya cited Rambam to prove that God is totally one with his knowledge. God, the knowledge, the known, the knower, they're all one thing. This might seem problematic since the Rambam followed a school of philosophy which was often at odds with the Kabbalistic school of thought on which Hasidic thought is based. So the Ramban, Nachmanides, more often than not, was, synonymous, so to speak, with Hasidic thought, or Hasidic thought more with the Ramban. He existed beforehand. The Rambam, on the other hand, took the more philosophical, sort of natural occurrence of things, generally speaking. But in this case, it says that the Kabbalistic school agreed with what the Rambam wrote, and the sages of the Kabbalah agreed. The same is true according to Lurianic Kabbalah. The Rambam's view can be contextualized through the secret doctrine of infinite lights being diminished to the point that they can enter finite vessels, as explained above. The reason that one might have a problem, a Kabbalist might have a problem with the Rambam statement that God is the knower, the known, and the knowledge is because then you seem to make it a limitation. Once you define God as something, it appears that you've limited God to that something and not something else. The moment I say these are glasses, that means these are glasses and not a bottle of Balvenie. Correct? So once I define something as God's knowledge, God's kindness, God means that God is kind and not something else, which would imply a limitation. So for a human being, that's true. But with God, it's not. Because with God, it's basically God taking an element of himself, manifesting an element of himself in that attribute, what have you, but not limited to that attribute or limited to that knowledge or what have you.
If you started that with and known and knowledge and
so there's no and
right
exactly.
But if there was
right, so then it would be conjecture. Right, you have correct. So let me just finish the chapter at the bottom of page 623 above that line. So the paradox is depicted by the analogy of God's line encircling the world. Now this knowledge at the bottom of 623, since it is from the infinite one, so it says that the can't be said to be enmeshed in the earth's globe, page 624, which is absolutely finite. Rather, it encompasses and encircles the earth, despite the fact that the whole diameter of the earth and its contents are actually subsumed in that knowledge, even though it's not inside the earth. It's not manifest in the earth. And diminished light of that knowledge creates the world something from nothing, as explained elsewhere.